throughout Jesus' life, among other things, he was revealing who God is, God's love for humanity, but also God's truth for right living. And Jesus did that both by his actions and his words. One aspect of this revelation coming to us through Jesus is about family life. Jesus could have entered into our world as a 30-year-old man and started preaching about the kingdom of God, but he didn't do that. What he did was rather he came down as a little wee child and entered into the family, the marriage of Mary and Joseph. And this teaches us one very simple truth, that God's plan for family life, for the procreation and rearing of children, is a lifelong and loving marital union between one man and one woman. And if we take time to study the first reading and the second reading today, there's a wonderful blueprint for the charity that should reside in a Christian family. Now, this teaching of Jesus about the makeup of a Christian family is closely related to the sixth commandment, which strictly limits the use of sexuality to a validly married husband and wife who are open to life, open to procreation. When we humbly follow God's blueprint for living, life will generally go well for us. However, when we don't follow God's blueprint, then life will generally have more problems. This was highlighted in an Irish Catholic article about a month and a half ago, in an article by David Quinn, who was talking about the Dublin riots. And he said that we need to see that what happened here was more than just about right-wing thugs or far-right thugs. There are deeper issues involved. Firstly, he said, we need to have an open discussion, a fair discussion, a Christian discussion about immigration, and maybe that's a topic for another day. But he also said that we need to look at what kind of society we are becoming here in Ireland. And he asked these following questions. He said, how many of the Dublin rioters would have had a father figure in their family, in their upbringing? How many of them were brought up with religion? How many of these rioters would have been saying their prayers every day? How many of them would have been going to Mass on Sundays and holy days? And how many of them would have known the Ten Commandments and would have done their best to live by them? And most of us would guess that looking at these rioters, they may have been lacking in some of these key aspects for what we think Christian life depends on. Now, we are all imperfect people. We're living in an imperfect world. But our own personal good and the common good of society will largely depend on our best effort to follow God's will in our life. The second thing I want to do this Saturday evening is to cover the widespread confusion that there was regarding the Vatican Declaration on blessings for those who are in illicit unions. The media generated a very clear impression that these blessings means that God now approves of these unions and relationships that were heretofore against God's will. Now again, we're all sinners. We're all in need of God's help and blessing. But the one thing that God cannot do is to bless sin in any form. This would be nonsense, because sin is an opposition to God, and God can't bless that by definition. So in a nutshell, the blessings that the Vatican are talking about is for the people in the union, but what we're not blessing is that which is illicit in the relationship. So we bless sinners, but we don't bless sin. And I'd like to give you a very concrete example of that. Many times over the 26 and a half years of my ordained priesthood, people come up in the Holy Communion line and they have their hands crossed for a blessing, and they always receive that blessing. Now, such people may be cohabitating. They may have chosen to have a civil marriage rather than a church marriage, or maybe that they had to have a civil marriage because one or other of the parties, in God's eyes, is married to somebody else. And it's also possible that some of these people looking for a blessing could be in a same-sex relationship. And when I give them a blessing in the communion line, we're asking God's help to give them the grace necessary to live the best Christian life that they can in their circumstances. The blessing would also give them the grace that they need, the hard work, to try to conform their life to the demands of Christian living and the gospel. There is a 2,000-year belief in the Catholic Church, going back to 1 Corinthians 11, that we have to be right with God, we have to be in friendship with God, we have to be in the so-called state of grace in order to receive Holy Communion worthily. But this blessing that is given in the communion line, of course, in no way gives approval to whatever may be illicit in the life of that person. So to sum up, Jesus' life reveals to us that family life should be founded on a lifelong and loving marital union of husband and wife. And the second point is that blessings for persons in illicit unions does not mean approval of the illicit union itself.